Hello, welcome to episode 3 of the Great Kart Rebuild. In episode 2, we did the whole front end of the kart. Now we are moving over to the middle of the kart. So what we're going to do for this episode is we're going to get the steering wheel on, we're going to get the floor on, we're going to get the fuel tank in, and we're going to completely refurb and get my seat back in the kart. Along with that, what we're also going to do is a little bit of a service on the engine as well, just so you understand the little things to do before you actually get your engine attached to the kart. Things like cleaning out the jet and emulsion tube. We're also going to show you how the engine mounts go on, and I'm also going to take out the old fuel tubes and replace those as well. So without any further ado, let's get going. So next phase, we need to get the fuel tank on. Fuel tank is nice and easy to get on the kart. We literally put it in position and tighten up a bolt. I have, as you can tell, this isn't a standard OTK fuel tank. This is the small 3.5 litre tank. Unlike some of the others, I am a little bit more portly and I don't need the extra weight. So I like to have the smaller fuel tank on because it's a lighter fuel tank, so it helps the kart save weight. But also, it's easy to get your legs around it. The 7.5 litre tank that comes on a standard OTK is a really big, wide fuel tank. So I want to just make it a little bit slimmer, a little bit more streamlined, and get this on. So let's do that now. So when it comes to putting the fuel tank on, we want to get it on before we get the floor on. Once the floor is on, the fuel tank is more difficult to get on, especially this one is an aftermarket part and it does push against the floor tray. But now, as I've got the floor off, putting it in this way is the easiest way to do it. So when you buy this fuel tank, you get this Alto fitting mount with it, and that bolt there goes into the bolt on the front of here. So what you have on here is you've got these little ridges. These little ridges slot into the ridges on here.
So what we'll do now is attach the first bolt just to hold the bracket in place to make lining up the fuel tank even easier. Once that bolt is in place, we can then grab the fuel tank and line it up with the bottom hole. Once the bottom hole is lined up, we then put in the second bolt, which should hold the fuel tank in place. Now when you're trying to get the fuel tank into place, you just got to move it around. It'll eventually find a place where it seats and it will seat nicely, and then you bolt it up and then you are done. So next we are fitting the Overflow fuel tank. Now you can hold this in with cable ties, but I'm using the Overflow fuel tank holder from JB Kart Racing. This is a nice little bit of kit. You just slip it onto the Overflow fuel tank. It comes with some cable ties that slide perfectly into the clips that go onto the side of it. You tighten up the cable ties and it sits on there nicely and it won't rattle. Really good bit of kit, nice and easy, job done.
So now it's time to get the steering wheel on. This one's really simple. It's about attaching the steering column mount with the Alfano holder on them. It's about getting it all in the right position. So let's do that. So the steering wheel needs a lot of bolts to hold it on, but also have to put it all on in a particular way. If the steering wheel's just on flat like that, it's facing quite high up in the air, and then you're in sort of like a bus driver position. So what you do is you add one of these, which just helps angle the steering wheel so it's facing much more towards you. Okay, and then you have your Alfano holder on top of it like that.
Then what you want to do is put the angled wedge in position first with the Alfano holder on top of it, then place the steering wheel in line with all the holes and then add your nuts and bolts. Get them all done up nice and tight because you don't want your steering wheel to wobble, and that is it. Job done, steering wheel fitted.
What we're going to move on to now is one of the more fiddly parts of putting the kart together, which is getting the floor tray on. So things you're going to need: a floor tray, some washers, some bolts, some nuts, and these little things. These little things are little squishy rubbers that squash into the holes at the front of the kart over here. We'll get a bit closer and we'll show you those in a bit. These are new ones. I'm not going to replace mine because the ones I've got are fine and they're a bit of a bitch to get out. So I'm going to leave those in and I just have some spare ones if I need them. First things first, I've got to slide this into position. Being very careful not to drop it off the trolley. Lift the cart up, slide it underneath, lift the cart up some more. So then what you want to do is you need to slide this part of the trolley up over these little lips, these little tabs sticking off here. Obviously with the weight of the cart it's difficult. Again, another one of those things that's easy to do earlier on in the build, because once the cart is heavy and it's one of the more difficult things to do. So there you go. The tray is in the correct position, we are ready to go. So the next thing what we want to do is we want to get the nuts and bolts in place. Sugar. I want my chassis protectors.
Ferret biscuits. Balderdash.
So, the reason we had to stop that video, as you may have heard me mutter, I forgot the chassis protectors. That's a thing that I knew I have needed since the start of planning this build. But every single time I've looked at the price, I've gone, oh, it's too high. I don't want to pay that for it, because effectively it's 3 pieces of red plastic and they're 30 quid. And I didn't really want to pay 30 quid, so I kept on looking for deals and then I forgot. And when I did find deals, they were in black or they were in blue, and I wanted red. Yes, I'm a poser, whatever. I wanted red. You can find cheaper ones. I've got a set in there, but they're knackered. In my opinion, they're knackered. Anybody else would probably use them, but I wanted fresh, shiny and new. So yeah, and let's get back to installing the chassis protectors, shall we, and the rest of the floor.
First thing we're going to do is put on the front chassis protector. We have all the nuts and bolts and washers that we need, but we also have this small little component which doesn't have a Allen key on the bottom of it, and you just screw it in from the top. You might remember this from my strip down video. It broke and it just spun around in the housing, which wasn't useful for it, but we're going to go fit it all now, so let's go. Putting the chassis protector on is a really easy job. It's three bolts. You put the 3 bolts through and then you put some washers in and you screw them on. Nice and simple, nice and easy. And one thing that you might notice is I did make a slight mistake in assembling the floor. So keep watching the floor video and tell me in the comments where I made an error. I do amend it, and you might see me amending it at the end of the video. But I made a slight error there. But the other thing to notice is you want to get it all done up nice and tight, but what you do have to do is you do have to remove the footrest to get the middle bolt in, because the footrest bar is in the way. That's the front of the floor tray done. Moving on to the next bit.
So we are then moving on to the side chassis protectors. Now the things to remember with these is you have them facing this way, so the round bit faces the top of the cart, and then this big thick bit goes inside, with these flatter bits facing outside. I'll put an image here to show you what I mean. So that's the best way to know you're putting them the right way.
So when bolting the floor tray to the chassis, the way to remember to do it is you do chassis protector into the bottom of the floor tray, and then the floor tray attaches to the underside of the tab that sticks out. But between the tab and the floor tray, you need to have one of the red rubber washers. And then on top of that, you have a metal washer or a flange nut, and then that screws into the tab. And then you are done. Do that on both sides, obviously, to help yourself out. Make sure you do the first side up loosely so that the other side can be moved around and manipulated to make sure that the holes line up. And then once you've got all your nuts and bolts in, you can tighten it up and you are done. So that is the end of fitting the floor tray. Your floor tray is now in. We can move on to the seat.
Now we're going to get to work on the seat. First thing first, the seat needs cleaning off. So I need to remove the transponder carrier, I need to remove this bit of cable, and I just need to give the whole thing a proper clean down. I'm going to give it a proper wash first with some hot soapy water and some Auto Glim car cleaner, and then we'll go on to using the elbow grease to get a bit more of it off, and then we will start to use my trusty sander to get this all back to a nice clean level. What I am then going to have to do is get a fiberglass kit and re-fiberglass all these holes that are in the side of this to tidy it all up and make it look a little bit smarter, because this is the tattiest part of my cart, and for these GX carts you want them to be as soft as possible, and for that you need the Tillit T11 VG seat, which is their softest seat they do. This is a very old version. This was handmade, but again, they are the more expensive, one of the more expensive parts. So if I can clean this up and save this, I would rather do that. GXUK, we're all about trying to get the most out of your equipment, so this is what we're going to do. So, unfortunately team, I have some bad news to report with regards to my build and making everything look shiny and lovely and new. With all the strides I made in cleaning lots of these things up, like the steering wheel and all the other components, bringing them back from something that someone might have put on the scrap heap, I have been defeated. I have not been able to clean up and make my seat look as new as possible. This stuff on the back, which came from a repair that we did at Landau, just is too much to repair. It was a quick fix that we had to do at the side of the track. It wasn't about care or making it look great. It was purely about making sure I had a seat that was safe to race with. So this is going to go back in the cart in this sorry state, purely because I can't afford a new one right now. We are saving the pennies. So hopefully with some saving of money between now and the start of the season, I might be able to afford myself a new seat, but not right now. So let's put the seat back in. So the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that when we put the seat on, that it's not sagging below the bars. That was my issue that I had before. My kart seat was a little bit too low and it was scraping along the floor, ripped off the bottom of the seat, and that's why we had to do the fiberglass repair that you can see on the kart. We found a really good way of doing this when we were at Landau. A scaffold bar, well, this is an old bent axle, and what we're going to do with this is we are going to latch it underneath the cart where the seat would sit, where the bottom part of the seat would sit, to make sure that that does not go below the line of the cart, because then it's not going to touch the floor. So let's do that. So with the bar now in place and a little bit of a cushion underneath, I've put because we're losing a few mil underneath the height here because of the cable ties, so I've put a little rag underneath just to push it up another couple of mil. What we're going to do is we're going to get all the nuts and bolts in place. Now the thing to remember with seats is up the top you have to worry about comfort, because if you put too much, if you're a bigger guy like me and the seat's not as wide as you want it to be, you need to make sure that you've got very few screws and nuts and bolts up here where these parts are, so they don't dig into you. So what I've bought for these, which I used last season to great effect, are these. Now, I can't remember what they're called, but I'll find them and I'll put a link to it on the screen somewhere. But what you can do with these is you take a pair of circlip pliers and hold it in those two holes while you tighten the nut from the other side. Then you have a completely flat face, so you don't have that rub, so you don't have one of these, which are lipped a little bit, rubbing against you for when you've got the bolt in there. So just gives a little bit of extra room when trying not to have your ribs broken in the car. So we're going to go do that now. Okay, so now we have done the top bit of the seat and got that in place. What we need to do now is do the bottom part of the seat. Now, as you will be able to see from the bottom of the cart, what happens is there is a really big gap between the tab and the hole in the seat. So we need to pack those out. We do that using some really big fat rubber washers like these. So we're going to need a few of these to pack out this space. Now, something to also remember when you are fitting a seat, this goes for the top part of the seat as well, up here as you can see. You always have to have a big washer up against the seat before you bolt anything into it, because obviously this is only fiberglass. You have a shunt and you don't have a washer like this between the seat and the chassis, and you might end up having a punctured seat. So always make sure that the last thing touching the seat is a big flat wide washer.
So this job is a little bit fiddly because you're working in a difficult position. You have to kind of go upside down to get these big washers in between the seat and the tabs. And then what you want to do is, once you've got the bolt through, you need to use one of those red washers that I showed you before. You need to put those through at the top, so that's in the seat, so it's nice and comfortable when you're sitting on it. And then you want a nut with a flanged end on the end of it. You don't want to mess about with having to have separate washers, because when you try and if you want to try and take the seat off, you'll lose the washers. Stick with flanged nuts, it works perfectly. With this done, that is the seat fitted. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to do a couple of things to the engine. So first thing I want to do is I want to get off all these manky fuel tubes and get them replaced. It's always good to have the fuel tubes replaced because, you know, when they're all manky and covered in dirt like this, sometimes they're difficult to see if there's a blockage. Also just means the fuel flows through it much nicer. We're going to take off this manky old filter. We're going to have a look at the jet and emulsion tube and make sure they're correct and make sure they're clean. We're also going to show you the correct engine mounts, how to fit them, and where to go from there. I've not changed these tubes before. I've never taken this off before, so we're going to do a little bit of a learning exercise. We're going to take it apart very slowly and just figure out how it's going to work. So let's get some tools out. We're going to need, by the looks of it, some Allen keys and some spanners, and let's get going. Let's hope I don't break it. So I took a super methodical approach to this, and I took it apart very, very slowly, bit by bit. Remember, it was when it comes to taking off the pipes that you can see that I'm taking off, I took them off one by one. Took one off, cut a new one exactly the same length, and put it back on, and then started on the next one. I wasn't going to go and rip all the pipes off because, knowing me, I'd forget where it went and it wouldn't go back properly. The back one was a little bit of a problem. I took half the engine apart to try and get to it, but what I actually should have done was started from the outside, from the back, plonked it in and then fed it through, which would have been much, much quicker, but it all went back together nicely. What we're going to do now is we're going to fit the engine mounts to the engine. Now you've got to be careful with fitting engine mounts. It looks like it could be quite simple, but it is easy to get it wrong, and it is easy to cause an issue to your engine. So first things to notice is these two mounts are exactly the same. So it doesn't matter which one goes on the front, which one goes on the back. So it's really good to think about. The mounts should come with some bolts to go in and washers and nuts as well, so that shouldn't be an issue for you. And something to remember with these engines, so if you've bought a brand new engine from RPM or from Monkey or GXT or one of the many other engine manufacturers that are out there at the moment making these types of engines, they may or may not come with oil in. If they come with oil in, they will tell you you have to be very, very careful on how you tilt the engine. Because if you rock the engine backwards, so this is the front of the engine towards the back where the exhaust is, if you rock it backwards, the oil will spill from the inside the engine where it's supposed to be into the carb, and you have to pull out the whole carb and take the whole engine apart and fix it. Do not ever tilt the engine backwards. That includes when you're taking it off of the trolley or out of the van or anything like that. Make sure the engine always stays as upright as possible. If the engine does need to be tipped, which for this we will need to tip it, you can tip it forward onto its front like that. And that is how we're going to put the rear engine mount on. However, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the front one. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the front bracket on. Okay, so what you do is you need to hang it off the edge of your table, not too far off the edge of the table so it falls off, because what you want is to push the engine as far away from the car as possible so that you've got plenty of clearance for the clutch with the chain on next to your seat stay, because that's one of the issues we have with GX. So the easiest way to do that is you take your bolt, you put it in the very last hole and put that very last hole in there. So once you've got your first bolt in, the second bolt will line up nicely, and then it is simple as putting your nuts on the end and giving them a good tighten and get them as tight as you possibly can. Then it is time to move on to the rear mount. Then we want to move on to the rear mount. Now obviously the rear mount is a little bit more difficult to get on because you've got all this stuff here. So what you want to do is you want to tip the engine forward so it leans on its front. It's the same thing again. What we'll do is marry it up. So you want to make sure it's pointing in the same direction. It's hanging off the edge in the furthest hole in there. And that is the engine mounts. Done. So now we're going to go and show you how to check your emulsion tube and your jet. So the first thing we'll do is open up this. Now if you're doing this anywhere other than over the floor, you might want to have a bowl anyway, because if you open this, fuel might come out. Hopefully there shouldn't be any fuel in this one because it hasn't had any fuel in it for ages, but if you're doing it during the weekend, there'll definitely be fuel inside. So let's have a look.
Now, it's not just any nut on here. This nut has a seal on it, so just be careful that you don't lose that. And the same one here. Good. So there's no fuel. There's no fuel in my one. Again, there's a seal on here, so make sure you check yours for seals and check that it's nice and clean inside. Now, your jet and your emulsion tube are up in here. What we need to get in there, we're going to tilt it forward now to show you it. You might be doing this, is that this might be the kind of thing you might do on the kart if the engine's not firing quite as right, or you just want to check you've got the right emulsion tubes in. Lean the engine forward, and what you need is a flathead screwdriver, and you've got to be careful with this. In here, I don't know how much the camera will show, you have a flathead nut, which is actually part of the jet. So you stick your flathead in, you find the bite point, and just be very gentle. So now I'm going to tip it back. I'm holding my hand here because the jet will fall out and the emulsion tube might come with it. There we go. So there you have the jet. This is a 75, should be a 75. You can tell that because it says, I don't know if the camera's going to pick this up, it says 75 on there. And this, I know this is the correct emulsion tube, but it hasn't got any marks in it. I think this is a W90. I'll put it up on the screen whether it's the right one or not. So all you need to do is have a quick look. I mean, I can see through these, and these are all clean. These were all clean when they came off my kart, so I don't need to give these a spray. But what you would do if you wanted to give them a clean, you get some carb cleaner and you just spray it through. Or if you wanted to get a little bit of wire from a wire brush and poke it through the holes to make sure it's all clear, and then you want to put it back in. It goes in that way. So we're going to put that back in like that. So that's going to go in that way. That's going to go in like that. I'm going to tilt this back forward. Now, when it comes to tightening this up, do not go super tight with it. Let it go as tight as it wants to go. There, just slowly tweak it, just until you start to feel some decent resistance, and then stop. And put this back on. So that is now the engine all ready. It's now going to go to Monkey Motorsport. Because my engine is not an RPM engine, it has to go to Monkey Motorsport to go and have the seal checked. So it's going to go and have a quick check, a quick run on the dyno, and have this GXT tag chopped off and replaced for an access karting one. Only have to have this done if you have an engine that's not bought from Monkey Motorsport or from RPM.
So the following day I drove to Essex to go to the home of Monkey Motorsport to meet with Peter Mathams, the owner, and find out what it is he does to check the legality of GXUK engines.
First of all, to check it, I need to go over some of the dimensions that are in the regulations. We're basically using the Honda 200 Cadet regulations, with the exception of you don't need the restrictor behind the carburettor. Essentially everything else is the same, except the seniors have a choice of 2 emulsion tubes in the carburettor. So I'm going to check you got the right emulsion tube, one of the right ones, and the right size jet, which must be a 75. When I cut the seals off, I'll be able to check the ignition timing by checking the position of the flywheel, and then I'm going to check it on the dyno just to make sure you haven't got some wild cams or anything crazy in there giving performance I wouldn't expect.
The first thing Pete has to do is remove the engine mount, clutch and chain guard mount. Then he cuts the seal, opens up the front of the engine to expose the flywheel so he can check the engine timing. This is done with a special calibrated tool that helps him check the legality. Once he's done that, he then turns to my jet and my emulsion tubes to take them out and check that I have the right ones fitted. Once he realises that, he then puts everything back together to get it to run on the dyno. So all we're seeing here now is Pete just getting my engine attached to his dyno, attaching all the sensors that he needs to make all the tests, adding fuel to it and getting it ready to run. And once he's got all that set up, he'll log it up to his computer, get the engine running to get it nice and warm, and then he will conduct his tests. With the test concluded, Pete checks all of the results, confirms that they are all within the ranges he'd expect, then he informs you of what your results actually were, and then he fills in a form to let Access Karting know those results and they save them to their records. And if you need to have your engine checked or have a service done or have something prepared on your engine before the start of the new season, please contact Monkey Motorsport. Their email address will be in the description of this video.
So that is it. The middle part of the kart is now built and put together. So the next phase of this build on part 4 will be the rear end of the kart. We're going to put the whole running gear of this kart together and maybe even get it started up. So if you want to catch that, please hit the subscribe button, please like the video and come and catch me on the next one. We'll see you soon.